Okay. Hello. Thank you, everyone, for coming. It's wonderful to see all of you here. So, for those who don't know, this roundtable is actually part of a curriculum on a module with fantastic students of mine here at King's at DP in a module called Gender in Democracies and Elections. But I can see many faces that I have not seen before, which is really nice. And part of the roundtable, really, the rationale behind it was that a lot of students asked me, well, we're learning all of this about institutions and maybe gender policies, but what is this really for? And one of my answers is right here in front of me. They're all excellent research practitioners, advocates, often activists, and that what they rely often on is precisely the knowledge that we have learned on our course in gender and democracies and politics, elections, and it's precisely the type of knowledge that they need to implement the change. Sometimes they do the research themselves. Sometimes they rely on academics and maybe future research that you yourself can produce. And I must say, I've got bios here that are also online. And as I have been reading through that, I was so humbled because it's you guys who actually make change happen, not us who are reading the books and writing things up that nobody reads. It's you guys making real change, societal change for things that absolutely matter to a lot of you. So I want to, welcome everyone. I want to read intros to the background of each speaker together and their achievements, what they've been working on, if I may, together with the organizations that they represent. And then we will have students asking questions to each speaker. And also we will open it up to everyone, anyone in the audience to ask questions that they may want to raise. So first, our first speaker is Florence Desai. She's the Executive Director for Media Matters for Women Sierra Leone. So first about Media Matters for Women. It's an organization that works to connect rural women and girls in Sierra Leone with the tools to be healthy, live safely, and fully enjoy their rights. The vision of the organization is to bridge the information gap of last-mile communities that are hard to reach with conventional, traditional media and provide critical information on sexual and reproductive health to rural women and girls. Media Matters for Women broadcasts reliable information and initiates conversations about women's rights issues in Sierra Leone, empowering women and girls with information. Now, Florence is a leading force in the fight of women's empowerment in Sierra Leone. She has spearheaded groundbreaking initiatives that have transformed lives of countless women in Sierra Leone. She has dedicated herself to amplifying the voices of women and advocating for their equal representation and participation in decision-making processes. And her tireless efforts have been recognized through numerous accolades, including from the U.S. Women's Business Council for Peace. Now, this academic year, Florence takes part in the Changemaker program here at King's, which is an initiative that supports research projects undertaken by grassroots activists and advocates to foster genuine societal change. And so we're very fortunate to have Florence here with us, both at King's and at this event. Now, our second speaker is Thea Ridley-Castle. She's a research and policy officer at the Electoral Reform Society, ERS, here in the UK. Now, the Electoral Reform Society is the UK's leading voice for democratic reform. ERS works with political parties, civil society groups, and academics, and the wider public to campaign for better democracy in the UK. The key goal of the organization is to adopt proportional representation consistently in all elections in the UK. And they work tirelessly to advance their vision of democracy where every voice is heard, every vote is valued equally, and every citizen is empowered to take part. Now, Thea, our speaker today, is an author of an influential policy report some of you have been introduced to on my course, Pursuing Parity, Examining Gender Quotas Across Electoral Systems. And this report sheds light on how the introduction of gender quotas And moving to proportional representation can be one of the most effective tools for increasing and sustaining gender representation in parliaments across the globe. Thea has a background in international social research and holds master's degree from the LSE and University Glasgow. Now, our final speaker, third speaker, is Caitlin Schmid, and she's a research fellow at the Global Institute for Women's Leadership here at King's College London. The Global Institute for Women's Leadership is chaired by Julia Gillard, who is the only woman who has served as Prime Minister in Australia. The Institute brings together rigorous research, practice, and advocacy to break down the barriers to women becoming leaders, whilst challenging ideas of what leadership should look like. The Institute undertakes a range of research, engagement, and dissemination activities designed to strengthen 5 key priority areas, which includes gender equality at work, gender and data, women political leaders, women in media, and grassroots women leaders. For Caitlin, alongside academic publication, because she has completed a PhD at the University of Manchester, Caitlin is an author of 5 influential reports, all published by the Institute. Currently, she's leading the development of the UK Gender Equality Index, which is the first index to measure and compare women's and men's socioeconomic outcomes at the local level across all 4 UK nations. Just a highlight from her previous work at the Institute, Caitlin has worked also on the project Bridging the Gap, an analysis of gender pay gap reporting in 6 countries, which amazingly was led to change of law on gender pay gap reporting in Australia, among other impact and achievements. And I will now leave it to some of our students to ask questions for our distinguished speakers today. And then again, we will open the floor for everyone. So thank you. And
Hi, I'm Devangi and I take the course with Mona. I'm really thankful that you guys are here. I just wanted to ask you, what is the most important societal change that you or your organization have helped to implement or has contributed to? And also I would like to know what you are most proud of about that. Thank you.
So thank you very much. I'm really excited to be here and to share the story of a post-war country called Sierra Leone, which is very far in West Africa. And it's a country of 7 million people, and over 52% of that population are women, who most of that population lives in last mile communities where I work. And my work looks at bridging the information gap in last mile communities. And we're very intentional in disrupting the system. And we are using media, podcast, in ensuring that women have the power and information and are in a position to ask difficult questions when it comes to accountability on social services, on women's representation, on challenging very difficult social norms that have been barriers to women taking leadership role from local level to national level. So we are very positive of a radical movement so women could make that shift themselves by providing them with the right information in making the right decision. So that's just, telling you the kind of movement building that we're doing with a specific focus on women and girls, and also getting men, because we come from a very patriarchal system where men have a lot of power, where men make decisions, where men, feel very threatened of having women being empowered. So we want women to understand that. And also, in terms of the legal frameworks, existing legal frameworks, for women to understand what those legal frameworks are and how they could hold our leaders accountable. And if you tell me what I'm really proud of, I want to say I'm very proud when I see a local woman challenging or holding leaders accountable on what the frameworks that the politicians, that our leaders have already, passed, holding those laws accountable. That is my biggest pride. Thank you.
Wow, I'm honoured to hear that you speak. That sounds amazing.
Thank you.
It's great to be on the panel. My name's Thea. I'm from the Electoral Reform Society. We primarily work in the UK, but one of our goals as a society is to work worldwide and implement proportional representation worldwide. So we won't be going away for some time soon. The thing, I work at the moment looking at gender quotas specifically, but also looking at their interaction with proportional systems. We also do a lot of works across loads of different democratic reforms. I'm currently writing a report on looking at automatic voter registration, voter ID, and ways to make voting more accessible, and that brings in a huge gendered aspect to it of how to make sure that women are turning up to the polls and how to make it easier. So gender comes in, maybe not in the exact policy area that you'd think of, but kind of like through the side door in a lot of the areas that we work in. Over the last year, we've had a couple of big wins in ERS. One of them is the minister's announcement that we will be having commencing the enactment of Section 106 of the Equalities Act. And the Section 106 would basically compel political parties to publish candidate diversity data all the way from putting forward to stand as a candidate through to election. At the moment, we rely on self-reporting by parties or individuals, or just assumptions of names from databases to decide what gender a person is, and obviously that's not good enough. And the main reason behind this push towards having this data available is to engage with like data transparency and understand the journey that women have to take and other minorities have to take through the system in order to be elected, so we can see where they're dropping off, we can see whether there's regions where they're specifically dropping off, parties where they're specifically dropping off, and things like that. So we're very grateful that that has come through, and that's been a tireless effort, not just by the ERS, but also by Centenary Action, who are a women's, I don't know if they're women's rights, but like a women's advocacy group in the UK, and they bring together a lot of different organisations that champions women's rights. The second piece is more linked to what I've been doing over the last year, looking at gender quotas, and we were very close to getting gender quotas in Wales. Unfortunately, they didn't make it through in the bill, but this week, hopefully that they are going to announce that they are releasing voluntary guidance for gender quotas. So best practice will now be kind of like written as guidance for people to use in Wales for their elections there. And our team in Wales, along with my report that I wrote, helped influence kind of like the thinking behind that guidance and understanding what it means kind of for people on the ground. They're the things that I'm most proud of.
Lovely, thank you so much, Thea. And thank you, Mona, for having me. It's great to be speaking to the King's community as a King's member, of course, at the Global Institute for Women's Leadership. We just moved from the Policy Institute to the King's Business School. And as Mona mentioned, our research our mission is centered around rigorous scientific evidence and using that to accelerate change towards greater gender equality. And I have the privilege as a King's member to be part of an incredible community, a diverse community with great outreach opportunities as well. So I take pride in being part of the King's community and having excellent colleagues. So Mona mentioned the change we achieved in Australia. That was led, I contributed to that, but that was led by my colleague, Mina Cooper-Coles. And of course, that's great achievement for us, seeing our research put into practice. And then the index that Mona mentioned, I've been working on for the past 2 years. I take a lot of pride in. I hope it will be a great data tool when we launch it on the 14th of May. So you're all welcome to come to that little plug there. And that will help us map gender and geographical inequalities across the UK. And besides looking at gender differences between women and men locally, we're also looking at where women and men respectively are falling behind or advancing ahead of their peers. So I think that is a tool that will help inform a tailored policy making for us to see, we have to level people up and make sure that women and men are leveled up in a way that they can achieve parity. So I'm proud of that work. And I'm also proud of the Changemaker program that we have that was conceived and is coordinated by my colleague Aleida Borges, who has invited Florence as our second Changemaker onto the program. And yesterday we had the launch event of the first Changemakers research program, research report. So Domtila Chesang was our first Changemaker. And she just released this report that looks into the social drivers that sustain female genital mutilation in Potok County in West Kenya, where she is from. And seeing her, she's been working on this for the past 10 years, and seeing how we at King's were able to support her through giving research support, getting her over here, talking her through her research design and her field work, and then Aleida going with Domtila to Kenya to support the field work there. That is inspirational to me to see how research is put into practice. And then finally, I take pride in the fact that GIWL from the beginning has been an institute that has emphasized that gender equality is not a zero-sum game and that men benefit from gender equality. So annually for International Women's Day, we work with Ipsos to conduct a global survey on attitudes towards gender equality. And for a while now, we've been ringing the bell that we are seeing a polarization amongst Gen Z people, or women and men, in that a great proportion of young men, 57%, believe that gender equality has gone too far and we are disadvantaging men. And it is still 36% of women. So I think we have to really work on that narrative to drive home the point that everyone stands to benefit from having greater rights, more equal rights and opportunities. And I think we really need to take this seriously. And we have to do more work on shaping and also mainstreaming new forms of masculinity that are not premised on the subjugation of women or other minorities. And this will be key towards building a more equitable future.
Hi, my name is Karishma. First of all, thank you so much for being here. I'm taking the course with Mona right now, and I must say she's an amazing professor.
Sure.
I have a question. In your opinion, what is the role of research in facilitating the societal change and advancing women equality?
Do we go?
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, sure. Okay. So research is critical to test assumptions and common held beliefs that we have in society. I think in the current climate, it is an especially important tool. We can also provide corrective narratives where necessary. And I think this is where it's an important counterbalance to a lot of anti-equality narratives. And just to give you an example, so we see this backlash against DEI policies and also pushes towards, return to the office, away from flexible working. And our director, Hee Jung Chung, her whole career has been building this incredible evidence base that shows the societal benefits of flexible working, how it helps women's careers, how it helps men be involved more in unpaid work, and how it increases worker well-being and increases productivity. So there's societal and economic benefits of flexible working. We can use that to counter that narrative that we should have a return to the office. Our former director, Rosie Campbell, excellent political scientist, you probably have been reading some of her papers too, she produces excellent research on the importance of having women leaders and how that is good for the economy, creates more stability in countries and raises living standards. This is the research we need to counter those narratives. Also, we can offer solutions with research. We can show how we achieve more, how we accelerate societal change, how we achieve equality. However, while research can analyze and make solutions to our societal problems, more is needed to really touch minds and, or touch hearts and change minds. And I think, well, teaching, education is key. Advocates are key. And I think critically, we need people on the ground like Florence working within their communities to engage, figure out what are the issues at hand, what are people worried about, and how do we speak to those concerns to help people see that, as I said, gender equality is not a zero-sum game and we can all advance together. So our research can underpin those activities and help advocates, and also I see third sector organizations in that group as well, of course, for them to push for local, national, and international change.
I mean, just following on from that, that's exactly what we use research for. Like, one of my key points here was when we speak to policymakers, they want evidence, they want examples, they want to understand models, they want to understand like what this policy or this kind of solution is actually going to do, and the research is key to that. Otherwise, if we go into something, it's just theoretical assumptions, and that doesn't cut it in a the current political environment. It just doesn't work like that. We have to be able to go and show people that, you know, women's equality can't be ignored, and the way to make them pay attention, or that we find to make them pay attention, is to come at it from a research perspective that is multifaceted. So it's the economic side, it's the participation side, it's the turnout side, it's that if you have 50% women in government, that the public are more likely to accept difficult decisions that are made on those bodies, and that leads into trust, which is a massive thing that's thought about. So the research that we gather and engage with allows us to come to conversations that we have with policymakers and the civil service and those type of people with a kind of multi-pronged approach, so that they can't ignore what we're saying. And that's off the back of research that you and Mona and others do like that, and bringing all of that together is really important. And it can't be ignored. So it's the research really holds paramount the idea that women's equality, if it's not realised, there's a massive societal cost to it. So pulling all of those strands together pushes the narrative forward.
Thank you. I think my own perspective will be a little bit different, but it all looks at, you know, authenticating the work, getting the figures, understanding what is happening. And also, as activists, it gives us a way to look deeper and also engage with the people that we are working with. Sometimes we are too hyperactive in our response without understanding what the beneficiaries really want. So having a research gives their own perspective. You take a break to listen from them again and see how you could, you know, redefine your programs, how you could, you know, get a policy dialogue to talk about the findings. And also it is an opportunity in breaking the silence, because many women in those communities and society that we deal with find it really difficult to speak up. And society have normalized most of those issues they deal with, such as gender-based violence, the gap in leadership. And so bringing that opportunity for them to discuss these things breaks the silence. And you have a way to know how they are being affected. So it gives this the study, the process of the study also helps in terms of, understanding the ethics behind addressing such sensitive issues. I remember during the process, and a leader told me, it is going to be a high risk. And I was like, what? She said, yes, because you're dealing with survivors. You're dealing with people who have already experienced, harm, gender-based violence. And it recalled to me that, oh, I was dealing with a girl who was abused, and later she had the perpetrator came back out of prison, and as soon as she saw the man, she lost everything. She lost her mind. She was not able to continue her exam. She had a total mental breakdown. Not if I had known that she would have needed some, support in terms of, getting, it's a process. Living with somebody who has actually abused you, your abuser, it's so difficult. So these researches helps to redefine the programs, helps to ensure that our programs looks into certain ethical processes and also support survivors in a better way, so that no trauma, we have less trauma and also less reoccurrence.
I will go forward to ask one more question. After listening to you, it is like naturally coming to my mind. I'm coming from India, and it is one of the developing countries, and we sometimes see that literacy plays a very important role. But even the literate women are not, for example, in electoral systems or anywhere, they are not representing the society, but because they are so much engaged, they are so much bounded with the patriarchal thing. So what as a policy maker or as a gender activist we should do to make those changes, those representing women and empowering them or something like that.
We
If
should
you can help.
act now. We should act fast. And we should be very intentional in our ask. And I think looking at the political space, there is, the men are very, very smart. In my country where I come from, all of the political parties, they have critically placed the women in a position where within the political hierarchy, the women have only one seat, which is called the woman's leader.
Exactly, this is the case happening in India as well.
And you are the woman's leader, and you think, oh, that's a big position. Not knowing most of these political parties, data shows they have more women than men, but more men in the critical positions. And that woman's role is to galvanize those who will be voting. And she's so powerful. She goes to the market, cheerleader, calls the women. They all believe in her. This is my party. This is my connection. But the moment we start holding political parties accountable, early as when elections, results come out, then we have to plan ahead of when, the next elections come. Early planning, very intentional, and we have to ensure that these policies that are already there, like we have the Gender Equality and Women's Empowerment Bill, how do we popularize it? How do we ensure that that bill is not only domesticated in Parliament, but at the political level? If we have the shift at the political level, then we are able to hold accountable in terms of governance level. But the shift, if it doesn't happen at the political level, then it cannot streamline to governance level.
I just want to add on the end of that one of the things that ERS would argue, and I would argue, is that changing a system towards a system of proportional representation boosts accountability. So off the back of Florence's point about keeping those people accountable, having a system where you're actually able to take away power if people don't actually give you what you voted for and what they set out to do is key in those kind of areas of like, how do we make sure that people are doing what they say that they will do? And when it comes to kind of like getting people at the table, it's all well and good having some people at the table, like you were saying, but things like gender quotas mean that there's a significant proportion of women at the table, that those women are representing a wide variety of views. It's not going to be from one specific party. The same with proportional representation. When you introduce a system of proportional representation, you're more likely to see smaller parties getting a voice in Parliament. That means that there's not so much of the homogenization of like the kind of like standard parties that you expect to see. Having those extra voices challenges the narratives that we've been hearing for however long.
And to follow on from that, Rosie Campbell's research also shows that this is kind of closing the circle. So having women in positions of political leadership positions, they tend to work more for their communities and stand up for the issues that their community is feeding through to them. And so having leaders, you see, standing up for your interests, then again also strengthens your trust in democracy. And I think at this time where we are at, we need that. We really, really need that. So it really just kind of closes to go full circle on that.
Yeah. You're very right.
I think we need to stand up, and after listening to you, maybe after completing my studies, I'll go back and then stand in the next elections. And
You should.
represent my women over there.
Definitely, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. First of all, very interesting points, and I want to thank Caitlin specifically because I find myself really critical of a lot of the data sets that I have to use when I'm writing like in academia, and I think so much research is based on data that has skewed variables, and so you end up producing skewed results, and so I think it's great that the data index is coming out. So accessing women's societal change through elections is pretty limited because you can't ensure substantive representation, which is kind of what you were mentioning. And a lot of the frameworks and resources that are available are kind of more Western, and I think academia even has a tendency to want to overgeneralize. And so I'm just wondering if we should be actively developing a different kind of framework for Arab, Sub-Saharan, African women, considering that there are just different patriarchal mechanisms at play, and whether research or more ethnographic work can be more influential in making this happen, if that's clear.
So,
Thank you. I'm a big advocate of context-specific policies and sensitivities towards cultural differences, and like working within the communities with people from that community. And there aren't blanket approaches, and I think we even see that in Britain, like in a Western country, we see the regional inequalities. They require very sensitive approaches to understanding what the problems at hand are locally. So I can't remember your question of what kind of framework do you mean? You mean a political or democratic framework, or?
I think more general political frameworks, because I think democratic frameworks can be difficult, especially in contexts of because I'm from Tunisia, and then it's like you're in and out of democracy. You see a lot of democratic backslide. So it's really difficult to kind of empower certain women if we're very limited in the alley that we're choosing, if that's only elections.
Yeah, so I think we have to have some fundamental principles we adhere to, of course. I mean, our conventions on human rights, those are non-negotiable and under attack now even. So we have to make sure we uphold those. But there has to be a balance that is struck between local demands and context specificity and what we struggle for in those areas and those universal principles. And I mean, it's a continuous process. As we see, so much can be rolled back so quickly that things we thought were set in stone. So it's just continuous struggle, I guess.
I think I would say that one of the key things here is to kind of like have that underlying global solidarity and consensus building on key areas, like you were saying about the human rights conventions and things like that, and going back to first principles on what we actually mean by equality, what that looks like can be very different depending on context. But if we have that underlying global solidarity of what the minimum of like acceptance is and what the acknowledgement of what it could do is, then I think you'll find that yes, a lot of academics have focused on the West, a lot of scholarship is around the West, and a lot of frameworks are based on the West, but those underlying principles I don't think change when you look across a global system. And it's about building those up within your local context, maybe learning lessons, but also maybe creating new ones out of the context that you're being given, and those frameworks are given and grow from that. So I think having that like underlying like global solidarity is key, and knowledge sharing is key in that area.
I totally agree with her in terms of, getting that global solidarity and also ensuring that we have, let's start holding accountability for all the existing policies. There are so many policies, like in Africa. For me, I always say we've developed so many policies. We have so many reforms, but are they actually implemented? How are we holding these policies accountable? How have research proved that, these policies have created change? Yeah. So for me, it's also on looking at, let's roll out these policies. Let's build and strengthen the systems. We have certain policies which can never be operationalized in Africa. You look at the Maputo Protocol. There's still countries who have not rolled out. And we have countries who have zero policy on FGM, and they are members, they are signatories to these international treaties. So how could we ensure that, we have the human rights? You're talking about human rights. It's the right of girls not to be caught. It's the right of women for their voices to be heard. It is the right of women to participate. A man cannot just come and tell you what is going to happen the next day. So I think it's about strengthening and operationalizing, in Africa, some of these policies. Yeah.
Hello, I'm Anya, and I'm also taking the module with Mona. And in the module, we kind of saw how, for instance, even voting rights were also only granted to women when there was advantage for policymakers in questions. So unless there's a demand or protest or movements for a policy, how do you communicate your research to policymakers in a way that they are bound to grant you rights, or in a way that's effective?
I can give it a go. So how is the question, just to clarify, is how do you communicate with policymakers or get them to pay attention to you when there's not a kind of groundswell or protest in favour of something? I think I'm speaking from a UK specific context, is that we go into conversations with policymakers, and no matter what issue we're raising, with the kind of backstop of the democratic principles that they were elected on, that each voice should be equally heard and equally represented. So even if there isn't a ground movement to say introduce automatic voter registration, because that is a very dry and boring topic, it's actually in their interest to pay attention to automatic voter registration and what that could do to their electorate that they're representing. So it's a two-pronged thing. The groundswell really helps with things, like it shows a huge movement and people get behind things, and that can put pressure on policymakers. But also, if you show policymakers that it will help their constituents and it will help the society that they live in, that they do pay attention to that. You don't have to only rely on those kind of groundswells. And things like automatic voter registration, which is like moving people onto the register without them having to opt into it, and explaining to them how that would mean that voices aren't missed in elections. They care about those things. They want to represent the people in their constituency, and that really does matter to them. So coming at it from that kind of like democratic principles and the first principles of that is really helpful in engaging with policymakers.
Great. Yeah, I would agree with that. From our experience too, we've just seen, and this is not just for the political sphere, but also in terms of business, sometimes you can find a key ally, and with them you actually go really far. Yeah. If you can find those people who do actually care about these things, and that's why we need good diverse representation, if you can find those people and collaborate with them, that can work wonders at times. And you then, when they move on, realize, wow, it was really this person driving this forward. So finding your allies is key. And then also, I guess, for me, always the challenge is try to communicate away from academic jargon into more accessible language that they can also then use, or politicians can use for their advocacy purposes, right? So, and it's always helpful having good comms people around you, which we luckily do here at King's. So tightening, shortening the message is just kind of key of driving the points home, and then still have the nice, thorough, rigorous academic evidence to back yourself up.
For me, from the activist perspective, what we normally do is sometimes it's a hard space to get them to understand the from the point that we're coming from. So we normally do policy briefs in terms of, the work that has been done on the field, analyze it, and bring it to the lowest and respectful way, and also for them to understand it is not my voice, it is the voice of the women. You are in a better position to translate that voice into action. So these are all strategies that we do. And again, we have, like now, we are, the government is working, civil society activists are trying to influence a bill which is looking at protecting girls on FGM, at least to have age of consent, 18. And so we have to get a lot of pressure, engagement. Sometimes we speak from our perspective in terms of knowing what is affecting the girls. Whilst they are politicians, they have their own, they look at, budget for health without understanding that if you have a strong policy to prevent girls from cutting, you can save on your health budget a lot in terms of, the repercussion of girls going through FGM and investing a lot in saving child mothers, women, maternal and child health issues. So these are ways that we get them, to understand that kind of technical language or message from the people that, listen, we are having so many girls being caught. Over 64% prevalence of FGM. That means very few girls escape from going through FGM. And most of these girls who go to FGM, they are seen as ready for marriage. And when they have married, the next thing is childbirth. And we do not even have the infrastructure, health infrastructure, to accommodate or to provide safe health care for these women. So it's all about engaging them at policy level, policymakers, so they could strengthen and provide a strong bill to protect girls from getting caught.
It's like about making them see it in like a more all-encompassing and holistic space, isn't
Exactly.
it? Seeing the knock-on effects.
You can save so much money,
Yeah.
Build on girls' education, expand on women's empowerment, expand on investing in women, than just being silent on a bill which just aggravates other issues on women's health.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Paloma. I am not part of the course, but I'm studying with some of my classmates here, my MSc in Economics and Policy. And I wanted to ask, with the polarization that you mentioned, how can we get younger people, and men especially, behind this notion that we still need affirmative action like gender quotas? Because I come from Mexico, where there's a big feminist movement going on, but I still see a lot of pushback because men think we already have these quotas, we already have all of these affirmative actions, and we're now leaving men behind. How do we make them understand that this, like you said, is not a zero-sum game?
I mean, that's the million-dollar question. But I think, I think we need positive leadership. We need men in positions of respect and power to come out and, show that they want to care for their children. They want to be fathers. I mean, it's good for them. Don't you want to be involved in your child's life? And so we need positive role models. I think we have a lot of very, very bad role models, and that stuff just kind of, I don't know, it has all this clickbait potential. We have to just educate ourselves on, and each other, about the harms of those kind of, for men too. I mean, patriarchy hurts men, and we have to communicate that to men and start building more. We're trying to even find what term to use, like nurturing masculinities, caring masculinities. What do we use it? This is something like collectively we have to work towards. And yeah, I think social media is a huge problem. We need regulation of like violent porn, revenge porn, all these online harms that are like so harmful to children, be they, of any gender. So I don't know how we're going to do it, but we have to engage men in the conversation. And I mean, it's so inspirational, just on a side note, to see in what's happening in Latin America, the momentum that's there. I take great inspiration from that. Change is possible. I don't know. Sorry, it was not a really good answer. I don't
think there is an answer.
Yeah.
There's not a silver bullet for this kind of question, is there? I think one of the things that I would say is like these men that you're talking about, they do exist and they are there. They're just not necessarily the voices that are heard the most. And it's always like, who's the loudest person in the room? And it's the person that doesn't want something to happen, right? So how do we end up centering those voices of the nurturing masculinities, or whatever we're going to pose it as? And like, how do we center those stories and those people, and kind of like foster that consensus and that engagement and that dialogue between everybody? And I don't have the answer for that, and I don't know. But I think it is something about bringing forward these kind of like role models and these people that are willing to speak out about, their want and need to like have women in their lives elevated to positions of power, and also their want and need to be able to work flexibly so they can go at home and look after their child and those type of things. Like, we need those stories to almost counter as loudly as we hear the stories about actually we want to never have to care for our children, and we just want them to be 18 and then it's over and done with. Like, we need those as loudly as we need the other ones.
And can I jump in? Just one more thing too. I think also we really have to push back when we see instances of patriarchy trying to disguise or being used to disguise inequalities. Like, inequalities feed or create. Sorry, I should start again. I think in economic insecure times, it's so easy for us to be divided, and we just can't fall into that trap. Like, we all have so much more to gain from equality, and it's not us that's the problem. It's looking upwards at the people who are keeping us down. And I mean, yeah, there is much that needs to be done in reforming our capitalist system that it just drives and is premised on inequalities, and we can't fall into that trap. And it's not us versus them.
Yeah. There's a big movement at the moment, isn't it, towards class solidarity almost, not over and above kind of like feminism or like gender solidarity, but class solidarity is actually becoming more of a thing that needs to have that like structure in place to challenge the capitalist system. Because it isn't us versus them this way, it's not going this way. So when those divisive languages are used to pit us against each other, it's going back to that kind of like, actually we've got way more in common than we do that divide us, and like starting again from that. And that's difficult, because when you're told it from every which angle that you should be blaming this person, that person, this thing, because you're not happy, or you're not in the right place, or you're not able to get on at work, or your bus fare's going up, or this, that, and the other, it's very tricky. But the education part of that is really important, enables people to be able to understand what actually is impacting them, and not kind of listening to this kind of media world and social media world that is becoming very toxic and needs way higher regulations on it.
Yeah, and as a distraction.
Yeah, from the actual struggle that exists.
Yeah, and I think working in the communities helps bridge those.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I just wanted to share that a personal story. I am the first girl to my parents, both late, and grew up in the Gambia, then West Africa. My dad was a teacher, and my mom had friends who were just getting their girls caught, and it was like a fashion then, my first daughter. But my dad was very protective of me and said, no, Florence, my daughters will never get caught. And from that moment, he made me realize that, I knew the kind of power, men have. We could use the patriarchal system in a positive way in protecting the girls. You see how male fathers play a critical role, and in protected me. So I think in terms of getting that into my programs, I always want to get men, especially men who are within the powerful voice space, the chiefs, the male. How could we engage them? And when you get them into these spaces, they get to understand that it is not a privilege they are giving to women. It is their right. Once a chief was looking out, in Sierra Leone, when you call a chief, is a local authority. And most of these communities, they are even well known than the president because they are accessible. And he wanted a male child, because you have to get a male child to succeed you. And he didn't have a male child. And so he was very disappointed with his wife. We had a campaign. We were talking about maternal and child health. And then we had a screen on cesarean section. He had never known what his wife had gone through. The wife had 2 kids, girls, through cesarean section. And then he was like, oh, this is what cesarean section looked like. I didn't have a clue. Since that day, he stood up and became a champion of maternal child health issues. And his community had 0 maternal death since that day. So you see how bringing them could change and create action. He was not, he didn't only change his mind, he made an action and saved so many other girls. He's now an advocate on women's issues. He's now an advocate on FGM issues. So I think sometimes just creating that space for deeper conversation on the consequences of, some of these things that happen to women and girls creates a huge change, yeah.
Thank you.
Hi, we're we're doing our research for our master's thesis as a group on femicide, regional variations in femicide rates in Mexico in the context of war on drugs policies. And I was wondering how you guys deal with holes in the data or things that aren't reported properly or issues in reporting, because we've had issues with that where we want to look at things more locally, but I think data is taken mostly on a federal level. So I was wondering how you guys deal with that in your research and for future policy making.
I'm very happy to take that question. So also coming to your point about, you were mentioning data as well. So we do a lot on, I guess, discussing the politics of data, which data are available, which data aren't available, and what are the political processes behind these data gaps. We also recently, last year in February, wrote a report on violence against women and girls data in the UK. You might want to have a look. I know it's a different context, but might still be useful also for some academic references. So of course, underreporting of violence against women and girls is a huge problem, and also like the way we go about identifying something as a femicide or not is a political process to get to that point where this is being, I guess, like classified correctly. So I think, and we also with this index we're creating, the Gender Equality Index, we wanted to collect as much data relevant to measuring and understanding gender inequality in the UK. And there's so many data points we couldn't include because they just don't exist, or they're not reliable, or they're not sex disaggregated. And so developing that index, as much as it was creating this tool, it was an exercise in probing the data gaps in the UK landscape. And I think I also just find it super interesting trying to look into the processes that lead to the collection of certain data over others. Who is deciding this? And I can give you some references afterwards too that might help you for your research. But I find it sounds so dry, but it's such a rich subject matter. And actually that's kind of what got me into statistics. I hated statistics as an undergrad. And now, because I see the social context of it, it really makes it so interesting, and your work is so important. So even if you're not able to research what you're trying to research, that is still a finding. If you find data gaps, that is something you need to be advocating for, that this be addressed, and how people go about addressing it. So don't be discouraged. Yeah.
I suppose when we do reports and we find data gaps, we caveat everything with those data gaps and say, like, this is from this. So it might be sort of like the other day, again, really dry subject. I was looking at the completeness and accuracy of the Electoral Register in the UK. So I'm looking at these data sets. They're all from the Electoral Commission, but they're all from different places at different times, and they're slightly reported on slightly differently. And the figures are kind of like, oh wait, that matches that one, but that doesn't quite match the other one. Ask the questions. Email the Electoral Commission. Email whoever it is that put that thing out and be like, hey, I'm a bit confused here because I thought that this was 18%, but then I've just seen in another report is 17%. Am I missing something? People that create these data sets, they want it and make it publicly available. They want it to be used. They want to engage with you. Reach out to them and ask them those questions. But when you are publishing that data in like a report or something, you must make sure that you caveat it and like kind of like write those kind of like asterisk moments underneath, being like, there could be other explanations for this, or there could be other explanations for that.
For us, we do not work more on, data, but what we do is to hold some of those, data being published or or policies being published accountable. During the last elections, we had the PR system was introduced, and at least there should be a woman within the list. And so we engage these women in the communities to tell them about the policy. And then we discover that even some of the political parties were not honest to the to the policy. They included male, they will take a woman's name and put female as a male as the gender. And so we brought out those issues and then told them to recorrect them so that the women could be represented. So these are ways of, holding accountability. It's not us, it's somebody's name who is a woman, but you have ticked a man's name there as a man, as a gender. So you see, and they are taking advantage because the women are not educated. Yes.
So my question is to Caitlin in particular, but anyone can answer. So I believe that you said that nowadays more and more young men feel that the push for gender equality has gone too far. What do you think is causing it, and how can we tackle this?
Well, I think it's young men who have grown up with working mothers, who are before they're not fully in the workplace yet. They don't understand that gender pay gaps really are a thing. They don't understand that women will, their age group or their peers, their careers will stagnate while they continue to grow. They don't understand the impact motherhood will have on them. They've grown up in a world where they see a Christine Lagarde, they see a Hillary Clinton running for president, they see Ursula von der Leyen, they see an Angela Merkel, they see powerful women. Sorry, this is very Western-centric narrative I'm giving here, but see these women represented, feel themselves that they don't have much good employment opportunities, that they're struggling financially, they will never get on the housing ladder, and they misplace the blame. They say, well, there are all these women up there, they're doing better than me. We have to start standing up for myself, for us men. And then leaves the door open for men and horrible influencers to come in and co-opt that narrative, when in fact it is women their age struggling as much as them. I mean, I'm not getting on the housing ladder. I'm not even Gen Z. I mean, I struggle financially, So, and I'm not blaming, well, maybe I'm blaming men a little bit. But it's not so much about the individuals, it's about the structures, right? So we need to, we need to address these structural issues and say it's not us against, or it's not our communities against each other. It's really the economic system that is disadvantaging the 99% of us, right? Yeah.
And I always say a woman who is economically strengthened is far away from getting into gender-based violence. You're well informed, you have your own money, you have your own finances, you know how to do it, and you know what to do better for yourself. Yeah.
I don't have an answer to that question. I'm sorry. No.
Thank you very much.
I think we're towards the end. So, we do have this room for another 45 minutes, and there are refreshments, very light, but please do help yourself. Stay around, mingle around, talk with our speakers, your colleagues and friends. Please stay in the room to continue the conversation. But for right now, I'm going to formally end this. And thank you so much for coming, listening, asking questions, being inquisitive, because you're also part of the change. And of course, the biggest applaud comes to our fantastic speakers. Thank you so much for sharing with us your knowledge, your experiences.